And,
Arn, in your training, what was the hardest thing for you to get down pat?
Well, everything was hard. You're starting from scratch. But thank God in those days, it was, you would learn your fundamentals, which was headlock takeover, arm drag, all that stuff first. You had to, be able to give a hip toss, take a hip toss. The bigger moves were reserved to be finishes. A suplex was a finish. A belly-to-belly suplex was a finish.
Right.
Crossbody off the top rope was a finish. So you kind of left that stuff till later in your training. And thank God, to this day, I have not attempted or executed a drop kick.
I don't think I ever noticed that. Why is that? Just not your thing?
Lack of interest.
I don't know why that's funny, but it is.
Well, because there's nothing funnier than somebody trying to drop kick who is not well versed in that, because it looks god awful. And I'll give you the example. One of the greatest performers and most over guys in the history of the business, I think everyone would concur, is Stone Cold Steve Austin,
right,
who has got the most rotten drop kick that ever was.
Well, you were mentioning some these days what would be considered a rather common move, but back then those were finishing maneuvers. When you're first starting your training, obviously as a young guy coming up, you're probably not expecting to win a bunch of matches, but did you have a finisher in mind? Absolutely not.
I knew it would not come up, and it didn't. Actually, it was until the last month or two of working for Bill Watts that I came up with the Gourd Buster, which was not used as a finish, as I did not win the match, but I was wrestling with Tim Horner, and I said, I've got an idea of this move in my head, if you don't mind me trying it. And I don't remember what the town was or what the day of the week was, but I was just, in my mind, I pictured going up for a vertical suplex, and instead of dropping the guy on his back and me going down with him, I would drop him straight down. And so that's where that was the first power move that belonged to me, that I came up with and started to use later on when I actually was going to win a match or two.
Do you remember who your first match was with?
I want to say Ted Allen.
Wow.
He took us down to, again, one of those small Alabama towns, and he needed an opponent. And I got to wrestle Ted once or twice. Pat Rose, who's a veteran, who's been around a long time, I wrestled him a time or two. That's the two names that stand out.
Pat Rose, by the way, still around today doing a fishing radio show out of Chattanooga. So if you're in that area, check it out. I think it's syndicated in a few different markets too. I think it's On the Hook with Pat Rose or Off the Hook with Pat Rose, but good guy. Go out of your way to check him out if you're into fishing and in that part of the country.
Which leads you to, after getting booked a couple, 3 times in Boaz, Alabama, and small towns like that, just local promoters that ran every week, Albertville, Alabama. I got booked. Ted booked us on Atlanta TV, and the luck of the draw, I got Bob and Brad Armstrong.
Oh my gosh.
And you're talking about class acts, pleasures to meet as human beings, and incredible performers. That's what they were. Myself and a gentleman named Deke Rivers. I don't know how well Deke Rivers is known, but we worked a tag match, and I got in there, and I actually got to do a little bit with Bob and Brad. And when the match was over, we went backstage, and they said, Bob looks at me, and he goes, "Thank you very much. How long have you been working?" And I said, "Well, I've had 3 matches." 3 matches. Jeez. So I think you got some potential. We're just here doing television. We're going to go back to Pensacola. I'm have part ownership in that company down there, and I'm booking and I'm working down there, and we'd like to use you for about 3 weeks. Can you come down? Do you have a job? I said, yes, sir, I do have a job. And he says, oh, well, you probably don't want to probably don't want to mess that up because I can only use you for 3 weeks. I said, I just resigned. He couldn't believe it, but I sure could. And it was really foolish to do at that particular time. But I went in, I worked a notice, 2-week notice with my job, cutting meat. And then I went down for Bob, and true to his word, 3 weeks. He says, so what are you going to go now? What are you going to do now? You're going to go back, get your job back? What are you going to do? I said, no, sir, I'd like to pursue this any way I can. If appreciate you using me, I guess I'll go back and, continue working out and see what happens. He says, well, let me do this. Let me call Bill Watts, see about you doing television. That'd be phenomenal. So he called, he said, yep, go home. Week after next, drive out to Shreveport, Louisiana, and he can use you for 2 days of TV. So I went all the way home, got my stuff together a little bit, went back to Bill Watts in 2 weeks, and he used me for the 2 televisions. He said, you want a job? I said, absolutely, sir. He said, okay, go home, get your clothes, and come back. And I went back, and I was there for 5 months.
Do you remember any sort of like wrestling nugget or information or something you carried with you for the rest of your career that Watts maybe gave you, maybe a piece of psychology or a rule of thumb or anything like that? Because I think sometimes Bill Watts gets, for better or worse, right or wrong, he would be criticized for not being, I don't know, we'll say a little rough around the edges, but did he ever give you anything that you were like, oh shit, that makes sense. I'm going to carry that with me?
He never spoke to me. That's the nugget that I took with me. I worked for him for 5 months, and he never said a word to me until he told me I was leaving in 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, there you go. Well, that makes sense. That adds up.
However, the one nugget before I forget it, because it's very important if you look at the way I've conducted myself the rest of my career. As I was leaving, and Teddy was still there, obviously he could have been there for 10 years if he wanted to be. That's how over he was. He said, now listen, I helped you. You're going to run across, if this pans out for you, and I believe you're going to be around for a long time. He says, you've about to figure this out. He said, there's going to be a young kid that's going to need your help. You're going to look at him and go, you know what? He's got something. I want you, since I did it for you, if you think that kid truly deserves the help, I want you to pull him aside and help him get to the next level. That's all the thank you that I'll ever need. And it just so happens, both of his kids came along, and I was in a position to help them. And that's one of those deja vus that really feels good.
Man, what a small world wrestling is. I didn't even think about the fact that you worked with them, but absolutely. Watts had a bit of a reputation, for better or worse, for being a bit of a hard ass, a bit of a stickler. And he also had a reputation for, being defended by his old pal and yours and mine as well, good old JR's. And Jim would have come to the Watts territory about a year prior to you. Did you have any interaction with JR in that era?
Well, I asked him about that when I saw him at the AEW event back in Chicago. I just said, JR, when did you start with Bill? And he was working at the office, and I guess he was at TVs, but he was so under the wire and under the radar at that particular time. I don't think I met him when I worked there. If I did, I sure didn't remember. Now, let me just say this about Bill Watts. Bill Watts was intimidating. He might have been a bit of a bully with some people. He was pretty straightforward and harsh in his critiques of you. But he gave me a job. He gave me an opportunity at a point in my career where I needed to drive those drives, and I needed to wrestle 20 minutes without being able to punch or kick. I needed to learn my craft. And after that, no matter what trip, once I left there, no matter how long the trip was, it was nothing compared to the trips I had just left. So I had already peaked as far as travel issues. It was downhill from there. So it was nothing but a positive experience for me.
You